Deuteronomy chapter 6, turn to it. I know I said Deuteronomy, I didn't give you the text, but there it is. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6. We're going to read it in a minute because and this has just relived itself for Lori and myself as we've been journeying together with she's just coming up to 3 years old, our granddaughter. And some of these items, I remember when I came across this a few years ago, I just found it hugely humorous, and it really depicts the growth stages of a family. So today I'm going to be focusing on the next generation. The next generation. It's really cool that Pastor Wendy has been calling our kids ministry the next generation. So I thought, well, let's just call it the next generation. So that's what the focus today is going to be on, the next generation. And some of you here have one child, if husbands and wives have one child in your family. Some of you have 2 children. Some of you have 3 children. Some of you have more than 3 children. I want to just take a moment to talk about the changes we make when we go from one child to the second child, and the second child to the third child. So, for instance, have you ever thought about the changes that come with each child you add to your family? And I found, when I came across this, I found this humorously true. First of all, a mother's wardrobe. Between a mother's wardrobe and the first, second, and third child. A mother's wardrobe. Your first baby. You begin to wear maternity clothes as soon as your doctor confirms you're pregnant. Like, whoo, and you start to, right? Second baby. You wear regular clothes for as long as possible. By the time it comes to your third baby, your maternity clothes are your regular clothes. Well, someone said regarding a mom preparing for birth, someone said, for your first baby, you practice your breathing religiously. When it comes to your second baby, you don't bother practicing because you remember the last time breathing didn't do a thing. When it comes to your third baby, you ask for an epidural in your 8th month. When it comes to a pacifier, first baby, if the pacifier, I remember that, if the pacifier falls on the floor, you put it away until you can go home, you wash it, you boil it. Second baby, when the pacifier falls on the floor, you squirt it off with some juice from the baby bottle. By the time it gets to your third baby, you wipe it off on your shirt and pop it back in. Right? You remember that? Diapering. Your first baby, when it was diapering, you changed your baby's diaper every hour, whether they need it or not. Second baby, you changed their diaper every 2 or 3 hours, if needed. And third baby, you try to change their diaper before others start to complain about the smell, or you see it sagging to their knees. And lastly, when it comes to going out, when it comes to your first baby, the first time you leave your baby with the sitter, you call home 5 times. The second baby, just before you walk out the door, you remember to leave a number where you can be reached. By the time it comes to the third baby, you leave instructions for the sitter to call only if she sees blood. Okay. There's probably a bit more truth to it than we like to admit. One of my great heroes as an author, speaker, apologist, Josh McDowell, Dr. Josh McDowell, has in his book, Right from Wrong, he states this: we worry our children live in a desperate situation. We worry that the society is going to seize our children. Our desperate situation, we fear that our culture is going to capture our children. The desperate situation is that our kids will soon be making choices, living their lives, paying the consequences of a value system they've picked up from the world around them. The situation that is desperate because of that world around them problem is they tend to reject the truth of the Bible, that they would possibly mock biblical morality, that they would glorify sex and violence because the world around us does, and that they would simply laugh at drunkenness and rudeness and on, the world system around us. He goes on to say, the challenge we face today is how do we pass on to our children values, but we need to know this. we can transfer our values to the next generation. You can. It's not hopeless. We can pass on biblical values to our children and teenagers. We can. And thirdly, we can equip them to live godly lives in the midst of an ungodly world. You can do it. We can do it because God says we can. And so we can do it. And so there's a model I've had and I've used that based on our belief system, we need to have a godly world belief system, fundamentally grounded in biblical principles. Out of our belief system, it determines your values. What values? What are the things that are important? What are the things that are not important to you? Values. But your values are determined by what you believe. And then from our values, we have convictions. Our convictions cause us to then live it out into actions. So we see the actions, but below the actions is a value system and a belief system. We're talking today about largely the value system based on biblical beliefs. How do we determine the values? And that is the concern Josh McDowell says that we have in our 21st century, and actually in the 20th century. The values, the challenge we have is that we live in a society that has very different values, for the most part, different values than the biblical values. And the actions are, we see the actions around us. So how do we get back into the belief system that rearrange the values? Can the values actually be passed down? And again, we can transfer them, we can pass them on, we can equip the next generation. And we need to actively be doing that. And that's why this series, this session is really important, because we need to actively be involved in these. Now, there's a QR code. Can we slip back to that, maybe, Mitzi, to the QR code? There are notes. I encourage you, grab them, take a picture of that. If you don't have the ability to do that, just email the church office, and we can email you the notes. Encourage you to grab this, because I've actually laid out the notes a little bit more detail this time so that you have more of what I'm going to be sharing this morning, because I'm breaking this down into a number of segments that I hope are big bite size for us to be able to digest this morning. When it comes to that, we can do all these things. I talked about we can transfer our values, we can pass on biblical values, we can equip this next generation. Of course, the big question here is how? How do we do that? I remember when I was going through studies, Doc Dobbins in Akron, when I was working with, he would say it's not enough to tell them what to do, you have to tell them how to get there. And so that's always stayed with me. Every time I put something together, don't tell what to do, how do you get there? So I'm going to talk about how do you get there? How do you do this in 21st century? And the answer is going to come from a text here in Deuteronomy 6, if you have it. This is a scripture that has a lot in it. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, 6, and 7. I'm going to read it. Follow along with me. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Everybody say heart. Everything I'm going to be talking about here is going to come back to the issue of the heart. And I don't mean the pump inside your chest. I mean that which is the attitude and motives and desires, your choices, your passion. Verse 5, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, mind, will, emotions, and with all your strength. You got to give it 100%. Verse 6, these commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. There it is again. And then he lays it down, verse 7. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. So, Father, we just desire that you would speak to our hearts this morning. According to this text, God, it wasn't meant for something 3,000 years ago. It's meant for us today. It's a timeless word for us. Help us to hear what you are saying. In your name we pray. Amen. This passage gives a divine model for passing on our faith and our values to our children. And it involves 3 steps. I'm going to give the 3 steps here. First of all, step 1, build a relationship. Now, you can say, that's obvious, right? Parent-child relationship. It is obvious. I need to break it down, though, because sometimes the obvious is the one we neglect. Build a relationship. Verse 7 says, impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, walk along the road, lie down when you get up. And these words beg, of course, the question, how can we expect to teach these things to our sons and our daughters when we don't spend much time with them? One of the big issues of today is the lack of both quality and quantity time with one another. The chief influencers on this next generation is typically not the family. It's typically somebody else who probably does not love your child, and certainly guaranteed does not love your child like you do. And they are the chief influencers on your child. I remember, when it comes to having the talk with your children. And years ago when our kids were small and questions being asked, well, when do you have the talk? Meaning, the sex ed talk kind of thing. And you need to be very proactive. And it's not the talk. It starts at the moment curiosity begins. I talked about that last week when it came to romance. It starts at the moment they begin to be curious, they begin to ask questions. They notice. And that's when the talks begin. That's when the conversation begins with them. And here's the thing, don't leave it up to, and if you're from an older generation, there was a tendency, and I was in that generation, I grew up in that generation, that talk never happened, right? Like they were just too uncomfortable with the talk. And so they just never had the talk. Well, you know what? So you learn it from friends, right? And what you learn from friends is probably not going to be as good as if they hear it from mom and dad, who have a much greater vested interest in the future of their sons and daughters. And so spending time, build a relationship. And this is the focus here. If we're never around, if we're never sitting with them in the home, if we're not out walking with them by the way, if our kids are in bed when we leave the home in the morning and they've in bed when we get home at night, there's a problem. A big part of the problem we see around us in society is the result of messed up relationships. It's a messed up relationship. We cannot impart truth apart from honest, meaningful relationships. We are to teach diligently, and that's the focus of this verse. Did you see that? When you're sitting, and why these they weren't repetitions, but these trying to get across. When you're sitting, when you're walking, when you're lying, when you're rising, you create every opportunity as a relationship building opportunity. Every opportunity. Even the most mundane opportunities are opportunities to teach relational truths to our kids. Pursue every opportunity in the teaching of this. So it's not just about quality time. I'm all for quality time. I mean time that really matters. Yes. But it is as much about quantity time. You've got to pack some hours into this thing. You've got to pack days into this thing. Can't be simply a holiday, a week or 2 weeks, and you pack it into that. No. It's got to be regular. There's got to be quantity. You've got to etch out things in calendars. Remember, it's for a period of time. It's not forever, ever. It's for a period of time. You've got influence for a period of time. You abandon some other pursuits to make that work for you. If you don't, you will pay the price. Those valuable, informative young years where characters are being developed and nurtured and formed and fashioned, you've only got a few of them. Now, some of us, we're looking at the other direction. We're looking down, and that's past. But maybe we can influence the next generation. Maybe we can influence our children's generation, our grandchildren's generation. Maybe we can influence our nieces, our nephews. Maybe we can bring influence to the church generation, those that we have now. So it's not just, if you're in your early 20s, you can make a difference in this area. No, all of us can make a difference when it comes to that formation and the building a relationship. And again, it becomes an issue of the heart. Biblical truth and godly values are best understood in the context of a relationship. If there's no relationship, it's just information. But when it's in the context of a growing relationship, it's more than information. It becomes really your big brother, your big sister walking you through a lot of your fears and apprehensions of life. Let me give an example how biblical truth, godly values are best understood in the context of a relationship. If I need to correct my children, I've learned to begin by asking a question that appeals to my relationship with them before I correct them. Give an example. So I appeal before the correction. If the answer to that question is positive, then I'm confident they know that they'll respond positively to my correction. But if they don't think there's a relationship, if the relationship's a muck between us, then that correction is like pushing a train uphill. So I might ask the question, before correction, you know that I love you, do you? You know that I'd do anything for you. You know that my heart is for your desires and aspirations. You know that. Those kind of questions before I'm about to go to the next step. What I'm affirming that they know I'm on their side. I'm with them. I'm not just an authoritarian. I'm not just their dad. I'm not just the holder of the big authority in the moment. They need to know I'm in their camp. I'm with them. I love them. They need to, and when they respond, do you know I love you? And by asking that question before I offer correction, I appeal to them, not on the basis of me being a big guy, a dad, on my authority, but on the basis of our relationship. It goes so much farther, so much farther. So the first step is passing our values of faith to our children, is to build a relationship, the heart relationship. Work at it, pray through it, how that works, okay? Number 2, next generation, is be an example. Be an example. I know these seem really obvious, and maybe it's just, I'm preaching to the choir today. Passing our values on to our children entails being an example. I want to go back to verse 5 again and verse 6 in our text. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. I want to back that up. I want to put the word because it's saying you. You can put your name in here, actually, in a number of places. I often do that. Often in my Bible, I will often just put Wayne. So when I read it, it's personal. It's not about someone out there. I need to personalize it because it is personal. So you can put your name, you, Wayne, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Wayne, love the Lord your God with all your soul. Wayne, love with all your strength. These commands I give you today to be upon your heart, Wayne. You put your name in there. Okay, you personalize it. Whether you know it or not, you're being so watched by your children. And the things you model, by design or by accident, you are being watched. You are teaching by example, whether you intend to or not. We are communicating our convictions. We're communicating what's right, what's wrong, about morality, about immorality, all by our actions. We haven't said a thing. We're just living. We're communicating. So if we want to pass on biblical values to our children, we must model those values in our lives. If we wish for our sons and our daughters to accept the ideas that there are absolute standards of right and wrong, you want them to believe that it's not just shifting with the tide of culture, but there's absolutes of truth. Truth is truth. And if you want them to believe of the absolutes of, again, right and wrong, then we must let them see that we believe it ourselves. When it comes to our kids, you know that expression, more is caught than taught. So let them catch it from you instead of just hearing it. Let them catch it. For example, if I want to truly teach my children to value honesty, then I got to be honest in the dealings with my finances, my tax returns, what I report. I need to be honest in how I respond to people. I can't teach them honesty if I'm not being honest. I need to live that out and let them see it and even dialogue around it so that they see evidence of honesty. If I want my kids to flee sexual immorality, this is a huge one, sexual immorality, I ought to be sure my television viewing demonstrates that. Not just when they're home, just period. What I go on and look on the internet, all that needs to demonstrate sexual purity. If I want them to believe that, then I've got to live that. None of this thing about, well, it's acceptable for parents and one day you'll grow up and you'll get it. No. You've just been a hypocrite to them. You're saying you can handle the flesh when you're big. Nah, you can't handle the flesh when you're big. Flesh is flesh. You kill the flesh. The earlier you kill it and keep it dead, the better it stays there. And so you live that out. What's happening? What do they see? What do they see you exposed to? What are you doing separately? That's okay. Do they catch it? Do they see it? Because if you have two messages, you've just taught one thing, but they really know you don't believe that because you don't live it. And if I want my kids to talk kindly to other people, what do they hear? You're coming out of our mouth. You know, are we gossiping? Are we slandering somebody? Are we getting in the car and going on about that, situation? What are they hearing flowing from our mouths to their mother, to their father, to a person, a neighbor who has the music on way too late at night, all that kind of stuff? What kind of words, what kind of attitudes are they observing from mom and dad? Because that's all being caught into their hearts and spirit. Your children are watching you. If you want your children to pray, and I'm sure all of us do, if I was asked, you want your children to pray, then pray with them. Okay? If I was to take a true census, which I won't, the numbers would be staggeringly low of how many pray with their children. More than saying grace at the table. You want your children to read the Bible? Let them see you read the Bible. And just don't go around and, when your children show up, rip the Bible open so they see you. But let your devotions, one of the challenges I had, because normally I enjoy going to my study in the morning and spending time with the Lord. But when our kids were young, I remember the conviction came upon my heart. They're not seeing me. I'm taken off. And so in those years, I moved it back into the home so that in home they would see that this is what I do. And it wasn't a show, it was because of what I do. And then we had devotion before they shot off to school, before they caught the bus, before we would drive them in different areas of their lives. We would always take some time in the busyness, and I know how it gets crazy, but in the busyness, take time, we'd stop, we got together, we read, we prayed together before we moved on. And they knew there's like 10 minutes there, that no matter how much you wanted to move things, it wasn't going to go quickly. We were going to slow it right down because these were so important to our family. The point I'm saying here is let them see you pray. Pray with them. More than grace at the table. And let them see you read the Bible. That they see the Bible's important and not just occasionally when you pull out your device, to watch a devotion that morning. But they see it's important to you. Again, the point here, be an example. Requires you to have regular fellowship with your kids. And I'm going to say your example also requires regular fellowship with your Christian community. Church relationships. Church relationships actually are very instrumental on children's longevity in the steadfastness of their faith. Getting involved with church relationships. Not just their peers, although peers is important, but just church relationships. We made a point that our kids weren't always just off to their programs, but that we had adults involved in our lives, and they intermingled with adults. So they saw not just their peers, and they acted out with their peers, but they saw mature adults. And we were very strategic. When we had adults, we go for dinner with them. We were very strategic that they were people that we wanted our kids to model. And because this was intentional. We wanted them to see it not just mom and dad, hey, that's mom and dad. But no, they're seeing it in other people. And this is kind of like, well, I want to be like that. That's normal. And we projected that on our children. And by the way, we did not raise perfect kids. I'm just telling you right here, don't look at me like that. It did not happen. But we were very conscious of these things. We were very conscious, and I can't emphasize these things enough. In the Christian community, have regular fellowship in church relationships. Have regular fellowship in small group relationships. And I know if your kids are into their teens and the older teens, it's a hard move to try to make shifts like that. You just have to live that example because you can't push them into those now at this point in time. Or certainly when they're adults, you can't. You move into more of an advisor, a coach when you're in that place. You're still influencing. But when your kids are younger and when others, and again, we're talking into the next generation is what we're addressing here. Being a part of preaching services, being a part of prayer services, healing services. Have you ever taken your kids to a prayer meeting? Just a prayer meeting. I get blessed when I see kids come to a prayer meeting for the purpose of sitting, not for the purpose of running around up and down, but for the purpose of coming and being a part of a prayer meeting. Somebody brings because they think it's going to be important for that child. And we've had that happen here. And it's been so encouraging to see that happen. Bringing, for instance, youth into that prayer meeting and just allowing them, and the parent taking a little bit of time to say, hey, can we pray together? And giving, and I'm all for giving a child. I'm going to be talking in the days ahead how children can lead the church to revival. There's something in a child's heart when they've had an experience with Jesus that dwarfs almost every adult experience with Jesus. In many ways, I would rather have an 8-year-old who just simply loves Jesus, lay their hands on me and pray for me when I am sick than for most adults. Not because I've an affinity against adults, not at all. That kid has faith. Just because they're 8 years old, they haven't got all the muck that we've got in our life. So if a child, I'm all for children coming, laying hands, and just believing simply, and even their prayers are all wrong. Well, just pray better, and you think, well, you put a lot more words to that. They don't have to, because their faith is already there. I'm going to be talking a little bit about that because God works through the power of children in an incredible way, and the Holy Spirit to impact the lives of children. And it's really cool, down ministering right now, the programs that are being developed in the next few weeks is really exciting for our children's ministry, where they're moving into open session, they're moving into interaction where children begin to minister with children. But you got to train that. We're going to be doing that as a church, but we're going to be doing that also with our families. Thus, something like today. Take them to a prayer meeting. Take them when they can see people praying for each other. Don't hesitate when there's altar ministry and there's prayer times. Have the kids come up. I was so encouraged. It happened last week. Family came forward and a 9-year-old came. And that 9-year-old was right with it. They were not to be left out. And praise God, you're teaching prayer. You're teaching the power of prayer, and you believe in prayer. And it's not adults versus kids. The second thing, if you believe in healing, then take your children to places where opportunity to see healing. God still heals. Let them see it. I experienced firsthand healing when I was about 5 years old and never doubted the power of God since. Never doubted it because I saw it. I saw it in me. It could have happened. The healing happened in my life. And God supernaturally healed me of something. And when that happened, because some people said, oh, by the way, why don't you pray for healing? We're going to pray for healing, and you just believe God to heal you. And so out of that, it believed in healing. And so I have no problem going to healing, believe in God for healing because he's a healer. But let them see it because their faith will just grab hold and ignite when they are exposed to healing. Again, we're talking about, yes, relation, but the exposure into these things. Last Sunday, or 2 Sundays ago, I guess it was, I was talking about love, unconditional commitment. And I gave the 10 dishonoring acts. So 10 things, and I know some people talked about them afterward, and 10 things that are dishonoring in a relationship. And I was saying, check them off, and some of them, got a lot of checks in there. Well, I want to do another one today. It's called the top 10 ways to turn off your kids from church. Now, you don't want to do this, so you don't go, I want to do that, I want to do that. No, you don't. You want to say, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that, I don't want. 10 things you don't want to do. Here, and I didn't come up with this, I came across, this was a study, top 10 ways to turn your kids off from going to church. Here they are. Number 10, schedule personal or family events to conflict with church services and activities. Number 9, you want to turn them off church? Don't get too close to anyone in church. Refrain from developing relationships with Christians, lest your children learn the joy and benefits of fellowshipping with other believers. If you want to turn them off church, number 8, look often at your watch during worship and look annoyed when church lasts longer than you think it should. Number 7, you want to turn them off? Tithe and financially support your church and its mission with the same enthusiasm you pay your taxes. You want to turn them off, church? Number 6, do the best you can to make sure your kids arrive on time to soccer lessons and school events. Don't worry if they miss or are late to church. You want to turn them off? Number 5, bring your family to church only when it's raining outside or you have nothing else to do. Number 4, don't volunteer for anything or make any kind of long-term commitment at church. Remember, you've got to keep your options open to do things that are more important. Number 3, you want to turn them off, church. Change churches every few years. It'll keep them confused. Number 2, turn them off, church. Remind your kids how imperfect your church leaders are and regularly point out their mistakes. And number 1, you want to turn them off, church. And whatever you do, don't let church influence the way you live your life. And you'll be successful in any one of those to move towards turning our kids away from the Christian community. Build a relationship. Be an example. That's what Deuteronomy is talking about. The last one in Deuteronomy is share the truth. Passing our values on to our children, you got to move to the instruction place. Instilling biblical values requires a commitment to teach our children. To teach them consistently, repeatedly, repetition's important, at every opportunity, that there is a standard of right and wrong that transcends human ideas and opinions. It is true. We share that. We teach that. Don't leave it up to your Sunday school teachers 45 minutes a week can't do it. Verse 7, let's look at it again. You shall teach, note the word teach, these things diligently to your sons, your daughters. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise up. You see this regularity taking place, frequency. I mean, if we go back a few generations, not many, fathers and sons would spend long times working their farms together, harvesting together, working maybe in the family shop or in the family business. They spent time together. You go back just a few generations, mothers and daughters, grandmothers oftentimes, often spent long hours cooking together and gardening together and doing duties together, chores together. Those long hours of being side by side, we think are antiquated. They're times past. But those long hours of that connection, side by side, presented opportunities to talk, for the parent to teach the child, for teens to hear about dad's perspective on honesty and about relationships. It created opportunities for mother to give their concepts to their daughters regarding their marriage. But our day and age is tough. It is tough. Opportunities are so hard to come by. I mean, there's hockey practice, soccer practice, art class, piano lessons, team tryouts, all kinds of things to interfere and intrude in our lives. Mom and dad, you got a period of time you got to pour into that. So passing on our values to our kids often becomes the last thing on our calendar. But that doesn't mean it's a lost battle. It simply means seize every opportunity. Teach biblical truths, godly values to our kids. It does matter. It makes a difference. It means when you go shopping, make sure they go with you. If you're going to the grocery store, picking up a few items, take them with you so that you can talk while you're doing it. Talk while you drive. Talk while you're coming back. Talk while you're in there. Have conversations and reinforce biblical honesty in the whole process. When the TV's on, your kids are watching something, join them. Watch the favorite TV show. And then opportunity to talk about the depictions that were presented there. How did the depiction of love come out in that scene? How did the depiction of sex maybe come out? What about romance? What about honesty or lying? Is it appropriate to have lying? You create opportunities from what's going on right there. Helping your children understand the simple skills like taking turn. Take your turn. You don't have to butt the front of the line. You don't have to feel it's your right and you're entitled. Taking your turn. Sharing your toys. Waiting in line are pleasing to God because He's a fair and He's a just God. That's why it's a service not only to you but to God too. Participate in children's ministry at church where there's opportunity. Get involved. Get involved in youth ministry if that's an area of need. Try catching your children doing something good so you can reward them. Look for it. Look for it. You'll find it if you look for it. Pulling out some pictures and stuff and using them as a way to share your convictions about purity, your convictions about marriage, your convictions about relationships and friendships, and how God protected you, how God provided for you, how God was there for you. And even when there's been disaster and failures, let them see how you worked through that and how God was there to sustain you in those times. Share that, the real life moments. Again, what we're doing, Deuteronomy, we're bringing it into life experience so that we impact our kids. I come back and I want to read Deuteronomy chapter 6 from the Message. It says this: love God, your God, with your whole heart. Love Him with all that's in you. Love Him with all you've got. Write these commandments that I've given you today on your hearts. Get them inside of you, and then get them inside your children. Talk about them wherever you are, sitting at home or walking in the street. Talk about them from the time you get up in the morning or when you fall into bed at night. Just a different way of saying the same text. All these things on your heart. If the heart's not moved, you'll never do it. If it's only a discipline, it'll last for a week or two and it'll stop. God, change my heart. Let my heart impact others. If your heart's right with God, then you can begin to alter the experience. I shared this with the group last Tuesday night. The heart of the matter is a matter of the heart. It always is. The heart of the matter is a matter of the heart. So I build relationship with the ones I love. An example, because more is caught than taught. And then I get involved in sharing the truth, looking for every opportunity to do that and make a difference in their lives. True story. A young Jewish boy who grew up in Germany many years ago. This boy had a profound admiration for his father, who saw to it that the life of the family revolved around the religious practices of their faith. The father led them to the synagogue faithfully. In this boy's teen years, however, the boy's family was forced to move to another town in Germany. This town had no synagogue, only a Lutheran church. The life of the community revolved around the Lutheran church, and the father saw it as an opportunity for him to gain prestige. So he joined because all the best people belonged to it. Suddenly, the father announced to the family that they were going to abandon their Jewish traditions and join an entirely different tradition altogether. When the stunned family asked why, their father explained it would be good for his business. The younger son was bewildered and confused. His deep disappointment soon gave way to anger that was unresolved, and a kind of intense bitterness that would plague him in his growing up years. Later, he left Germany and went to England to study. While there, he began to write a book. In that book, he introduced a whole new worldview and conceived a movement that was designed to change the world. He described religion as, quote, opiate for the masses, unquote. He committed the people who followed him to live their lives without God. And his name, Karl Marx, was his name. The founder of communist movement, the history of the 20th century and up to today, significantly perverted by Marxist teachings. That's the story behind his life. And when I read that story, I thought that story's played out in a lot of smaller situations where maybe if we had just invested our value and belief system in building relationships, setting the example, sharing the truth, getting involved. I want to read again Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. I'm going to invite Pastor Daniel to come. And I want to pray with you in just a moment from now. I want to read this again. Love God, your God, with your whole heart. Love Him with all that's in you. Love Him with all you've got. Write these commandments that I've given you today on your hearts. Get them inside you. And then get them inside your children. Talk about them wherever you are. Sitting at home, walking in the street. Talk about them from the time you get up in the morning to when you fall into bed at night. In a few moments, I want to pray because we are all in different stages of our lives. Some here are the stage of young families. Others in the stage of middle-aged family. Your kids maybe are late in life, late in school, maybe college, university. Maybe your kids have left the home. Maybe you've got grandkids. Maybe you have no children at all. But I honestly believe that as part of a Christian community, we are all influencers on families. It matters. It matters, this text, I think every single person, wherever we are in our context and time, it matters. But my prayer this morning as I pray for you, as I want to pray with you, is, and we've been impacted in our family. We have a long time. Some of you know a bit of our stories of our family. It's a journey. It's ongoing. It continues to be ongoing. But we're engaged to life because there's a lot of good at the end of it. We want to be able to pass down sets of values, morality, and our lives, our example. However, it shifts from being the primary caregiver to being maybe simply a coach in time. But you still can make a difference. And even as grandparents, huge impact you can have on kids right now. I know there's a family right here in our church right now who's looking after grandkids who can't come this morning. They said, can't come. Stuff is going on. And but they're pouring into their grandkids. And man, guys, go for it. Pour in everything you've got. That's good. But we want to pray because sometimes we feel despair. Sometimes it's going like it's too late now. No, it's not too late. It's not too late. As long as he's given us breath. And guess what? You wouldn't be here if he didn't give you any breath. As long as he's given you breath, he's given hope. He can intervene. He can make a difference. But it really begins with my heart. It begins with your heart. And that whole text in Deuteronomy starts and ends with your heart. Your heart. And then it moves into the other areas. God will open avenues where the avenues need to be open. So I want to pray with you. So I'm going to invite you. Would you join me in standing? And what I'm going to do is if you've got something very specific that's heavy on your heart with regard to your family. Okay? You've got something very specific that's heavy on your heart with regard to your immediate family. I'm thinking more immediacy. I'm going to invite you in just a moment to come to the front. And then I'm going to ask, because we're a part of a church community, we don't know each other other than we have name tags. But I don't have to know a lot about the person. I simply am a follower of Jesus, and I care that their family succeeds. And I'm willing to pray for them, willing to do that.